let's take a look at a study that deals with logical reconstruction in relation to memory. This one is about phantom flashbulbs. Here we will talk about an experiment that uncovered that often the flashbulb memories that we talked about in the beginning of this video aren't necessarily true recollections. So here is the setup of this study. Specifically, this is about the explosion of the Space Shuttle Challenger. This is a study that was cleverly designed in that it made use of this disaster and this tragic occurrence to at least leverage it into some research on memory, and in this case on logical reconstruction. So the Challenger space shuttle explosion was just big news on TV, in particular, so not just in the US, but in particular in the US, where the space shuttle originated from. And when it blew up, like I said, this was really very big news, and it touched many people to the core. And the researchers who conducted the study asked participants the morning after to report how they heard about this Challenger explosion and who was with them at the time when they heard about it. And then almost 3 years later, they managed to reach out to the same participants and question them again. So in this questioning again, they got the same questions. They were again asked, how did you hear about it? And also they were asked, how certain are you that you're recalling this correctly? And they were also asked, who was with you? And how certain are you that these were the people that were with you? So basically what we have is we have a really close to the truth report the morning after. And we have a recollection almost 3 years later. Let's take a look at the results. I could also ask you to build some expectations first, but I think I've heavily foreshadowed that here we will find people are not actually great at recalling these flashbulb memories, which we might have expected given that the Challenger blast was actually such a big event. It might have actually created true flashbulb memories. But in this case, okay, let's first take a look at the accuracy of the recalled memories 3 years after. On the left side, that's the plot you can see, and then the accuracy scores on the x-axis, the number of subjects on the y-axis. And here we have weighted accuracy, and you can see there's a lot of variation. There are some people who are like really accurate, a bunch of people who are sort of in the middle, and also lots of people who just don't recall at all what they had originally said, but they report something completely different. And then if we take a look on the right-hand side at the mean confidence ratings, you can see that even though many people were quite inaccurate, many people were also very, very confident. So there's actually, in this case, no positive correlation between confidence and accuracy. So we would say this is an example of how our memories really are not like not a mirror of the actual past that we lived through, but in this case, we reconstructed them. And then there's also, you could say that basically we retrieve our memories when we look back, and we actually have some kind of a logical expectation of how we remember things. So in this study, many people reconstructed the information source. And in reality, 21% actually heard about the Challenger blow up on TV. And we know that because they reported that the morning after. But 45% remembered hearing about it from TV 3 years later. So, but it would make sense that you would have heard it from TV because this is the most likely place you could have probably gotten it from, right? If you were just trying to think back. So the frameworks of meaning that we have today influence how we can retrieve information. And of course, it can also influence how we encode information in the first place. But in this case, this is an example of basically motivated retrieval or reconstruction of memory in the retrieval stage. Now let's take a look at another facet of how memory and meaning relate. And in this case, it's about a study by Johnson, Ray, Wang, and Taylor from 1979. Fact and Fantasy, the Roles of Accuracy and Variability in Confusing Imaginations with Perceptual Experiences. So this is about source monitoring. And here is the design of the study. In the study, the presentation frequency of specific images was varied. So an image was presented either 2 times or 5 times or 8 times. And as opposed to that, participants were also instructed to imagine a certain object either 2 times or 5 times or 8 times. And we have some information about whether people are imagers, so whether they are good or bad at remembering colors. And participants were then asked, this is our DV, how often did you see the picture presented? So this is not about how often did you imagine it, but how often did you actually see it? Now, let's take a look at the results. And clearly this must be about whether people are able to tell apart seeing and imagining a specific object. Now, let's take a look at the results. And here we have a pretty complex graph this time, so let's take some time to really explain it. First of all, what do we see? We see good versus poor imagers, so people who are really good at imagining things and people who are worse at it. And then what we have plotted on the y-axis is the mean judged presentation frequency. So how often did people think a certain object was presented? And plotted on the x-axis is the actual number of image trials. And then we have this data split again by the presentation frequency in the imagined trials. So 2, 5 versus 8, and again 2, 5 versus 8 for actual image trials. Okay, and what do we see? Information that was displayed more often was also judged to have been displayed more often, to have been shown more often as an image, but the frequency of imagining that people had seen it also influenced the judged frequency of actually having seen it. So here, people confused, and of course, you can see that this effect is slightly larger for people who are good at imagining stuff. So what we can see is that people confused where their memory is coming from, where the retrieval of presentation frequency, whether it came from the image versus the imagined trials, that got kind of muddled together, and people confused the two. So yeah, that's another, of course, example of how memory can create meaning. If our memory is influenced by sources overlapping, and we therefore misremember, we may change, or the meaning that we create from situations may be different from what it actually factually was.